The stars stretched endlessly across the dark canvas of space as the human vessel drifted closer to Velterix, a planet hidden in a spiral arm of the galaxy where colors shifted in the sky and time felt different. Aboard the diplomatic cruiser, Eli stood near the observation window, his eyes following the shimmer of the atmosphere outside. This was not his first mission to an alien world, but Velterix was unlike anything he had seen. The planet breathed with hues of violet and silver, and its surface pulsed softly like it was alive. Eli had been chosen for this delegation, not just because of his diplomatic skills, but because of his curiosity and willingness to understand the unknown. Humanity had only recently made peaceful contact with the Turians, an ancient and intelligent species that communicated through thought and emotion more than words. Their language could not be spoken, it was felt the moment he stepped on Velterix. Eli sensed something unusual. The air carried a faint hum that vibrated through the bones, not painful, but deeply noticeable. The city, if it could be called that, looked grown rather than built. Towers spiraled like glass vines rising from the ground, and light seemed to emerge from within the stone rather than from lamps. The Turians were tall and graceful. Their bodies shimmered faintly under natural light, and their faces held an expression of calm curiosity. They had no mouths but projected emotions and intentions directly into the minds of others. Some humans found this invasive or overwhelming, but Eli found it fascinating. It was during a cultural ceremony that Eli first noticed Kayla. She stood apart from the others, her presence quiet yet deeply magnetic. Her body glowed slightly bluer than the rest, her gestures slower, more fluid. When their eyes met, or what he thought were her eyes, a strange warmth touched his thoughts. No words came, but he felt an invitation, a quiet sense of welcome. Over the next few days, Kayla and Eli crossed paths often. She would appear near the delegation grounds, always observing from a distance. Eli began seeking her out more, feeling drawn to the connection they shared. When she finally approached him fully, her presence filled his mind like a tide. She communicated without force, just gentle waves of emotion and understanding. He learned she was a kind of spiritual keeper among her people, one who understood the deep energies of her world. She seemed curious about humans in a way that felt pure and almost innocent. They began to spend time together away from the others, near the glass-like lakes and under trees that whispered soft melodies. Sometimes she would place her hand near his, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her thoughts more clearly. It was addictive. Eli found himself thinking about her at night, replaying their shared thoughts, wondering what intimacy could feel like with a being who experienced connection on a level humans could barely imagine. His colleagues on the diplomatic team warned him. One of them, a senior officer named Marek, took him aside and spoke bluntly. The Turians were different, deeply different, and intimacy with them was not what humans thought it would be. There were stories half-whispered and hard to confirm of humans becoming lost inside the bond, of forgetting themselves. Marek told him Kayla's kind did not know how to not bond fully, and full bonding might not be survivable for a human body. But Eli shrugged off the concern. He believed people feared what they did not understand. Kayla never forced anything. She was gentle, always giving him the chance to pull away. She even tried to warn him in her own way, sending him impressions of depth and merging, of becoming more than just two individuals. Eli took it as metaphor, poetry of a species who had no spoken language. He thought she was beautiful in her own way, thoughtful and kind, and if their minds could touch so deeply, perhaps their bodies could too. One evening, Kayla brought him to a hidden chamber beneath the living city, a space pulsing softly with organic light. The walls responded to their movement, changing color with emotion. In the center of the chamber was a circular platform surrounded by floating threads of light, humming gently. She stepped into it and looked at him with an expression that felt like longing and caution mixed into one. In his mind, she said only one thing. A thought carried like a song made of warmth and shadow. Are you ready to become one? Eli nodded. He stepped forward, heart racing not from fear but anticipation. He had imagined this moment in a dozen ways, always thinking it would be like love between humans, just deeper and stranger. But this was something else. The moment he crossed into the light, something shifted. The air grew thick but not heavy. Kayla reached for him not physically but mentally, and he felt her presence flood into every corner of his mind. His memories, his desires, his fears all visible to her. She opened herself to him too, showing lifetimes of thoughts and feelings, centuries of watching stars fall and rise again. Then her hands moved closer, not quite touching, yet drawing energy between them. His skin tingled, his breath quickened, and then she stepped closer still. Something soft touched his chest. Not her hands, but something warmer, spreading like liquid heat. It moved slowly across his body, smooth and pulsing, and as it touched his skin, it merged slightly with him. He gasped. It felt like falling into a dream where his body was both floating and sinking. He tried to speak but found he had no voice inside the chamber. Only thoughts could move now. Kayla's presence was growing, not beside him but inside. Her emotions were wrapping around his, her mind threading itself into the edges of his awareness. He tried to slow things down, to signal her, but her thoughts replied gently that there was no stopping now. Not after they had begun. For her people, once the bond was accepted, it could not be undone. His mind was still calm, enchanted by the flood of emotion. But his body began to react differently. His skin burned in places, not from fire but from change. Veins glowed faintly. Parts of his chest felt like they were being pulled inward. His knees weakened. Something deep inside warned him this was not pleasure anymore. It was transformation, or consumption. Still surrounded by warmth, still locked in Kayla's gaze, Eli realized something too late. He thought alien intimacy would be fun, but now her body was trying to consume him alive. Eli could not move, but he could still feel everything, as if his senses had multiplied into hundreds of tiny threads, each pulling in a different direction, yet all rooted in the same center, which was no longer just him, but something shared now, something becoming less his and more theirs. The space around him was glowing brighter, and the strands of light that had floated earlier were now circling his body, brushing his skin without touch, but sending waves of warmth that felt like whispers beneath the surface. Kayla stood in front of him, no longer separate. Her form was changing, subtly softening and flowing like liquid shaped by thought and purpose. Her eyes, or what he once saw as eyes, shimmered brighter and brighter, their light reflecting emotions too deep for any human word to capture in that moment. Eli felt her desire not for control or conquest, but for closeness. Beyond what humans could understand, the heat around his chest intensified, not burning, not painful, but overwhelming, as if something inside him was answering her call without permission. His breath became shallow, his hands trembled, and when he tried to lift them, they moved slowly, like they were sinking into something invisible. Kayla reached out, not with her hands but with something deeper. Her energy poured into him, not like a wave, but like roots seeking home. Their minds touched again, this time with no barriers. Eli saw her memories the way she had watched her world from the cliffs of her childhood, how the winds carried songs of her ancestors, how her people had always known love not as companionship, but as merging unity, where two souls became one essence, never alone again. He felt her longing for that connection, and how lonely she had felt waiting for someone to understand it. Then he saw himself through her eyes, not as a stranger, not as a man from another planet, but as someone she believed could meet her in that sacred place of oneness. The pressure on his chest deepened, a warmth traveling through his spine as her presence moved into every corner of his awareness. It was not an invasion, it was an offering. Eli was still human, and the human body had limits. His heart pounded fast now, his thoughts scrambled, trying to hold on to something familiar. He wanted to say her name, to ask For pause, but there was no voice here, only shared feeling, and in her feeling he found no fear, only love, only trust. Glowing threads around them spun faster, encircling their forms with steady rhythm, and Kayla stepped closer again, not walking, but gliding as if the chamber had lifted gravity from them. Her body began to shimmer brighter, and parts of her shape extended gently toward him, not arms, not limbs, but smooth living streams of energy and flesh reaching his chest, and then slowly wrapping around his back. It felt like a blanket of stars pressing softly against him, and then something more. Her body did not press with weight, but entered in small places, through the skin, through the mind, through the breath. Her thoughts flowed through his, and in return, his memories became open. She saw his childhood, his first day in space, his fear when he almost lost control of a ship, his laughter with friends, his loneliness in the quiet of deep space. She absorbed it all and held it close. He felt tears in his eyes, not from pain, but from the intensity of being known so completely. The light inside the chamber pulsed in sync with his heartbeat, and the humming sound that had been constant since his arrival on Velterix grew louder, no longer just sound, but sensation that touched every nerve in his body. Kayla sent a feeling to him, not words but meaning. It said, "You are opening, you are becoming, you are stepping beyond self." Eli could not reply, he could only feel, and what he felt now was strange. His legs had gone numb, and something warm was spreading from where her body touched his chest. It was like his body was being pulled slowly and gently inside something larger, like clay returning to the earth. He tried to take a step back, but the chamber did not allow it. His feet were anchored, not by force, but by fusion. Kayla's energy was wrapping around his lower body, not like ropes, but like vines blooming around him, soft yet firm, flowing and breathing in rhythm. With him, his vision blurred, and his mind struggled to stay focused. He tried to think of Earth, of the stars outside of the ship waiting above, but every time he reached for those thoughts, they drifted away like smoke. Kayla was all he could see, all he could hear, all he could feel. And then she whispered into his mind again, this time, her voice trembling not with fear but with joy. "This is how we love. This is how we live together as one." Eli's body began to respond in ways he could not control. Parts of his skin shimmered under the chamber's light. His breath became shallow and deep at the same time. His body no longer obeyed simple commands. He could not lift his arm, he could not bend his knee, and when he looked down, he saw that her form had begun to merge with his lower half. It was not violent, it was not cruel, but it was terrifying. His skin tingled with every pulse of light, and her energy moved through his spine and into his chest, where he could feel her thoughts filling him with memories of her people, and how each union brought a new being into the world, not by birth, but by fusion. Two lives forming a third. Eli screamed inside, but no sound escaped. He pushed against the bond, but his resistance only made the connection stronger. Her body responded to his fear by calming him, by surrounding him tighter, not with pressure, but with presence. She whispered again, "This is love, and it lasts forever." That moment he realized what intimacy meant to her people. It was not closeness, it was not partnership, it was complete surrender. It was the end of self, it was the beginning of something else. And Eli knew if this continued, there would be no him left to remember. Eli floated in a place between thought and body where nothing felt solid, and nothing stayed still. The chamber was no longer a room with walls and light, but a world of shifting energy where Kayla's presence wrapped around him like a sea without shore. His limbs were disappearing, slowly, not in the way that meant harm, but in the way that meant change. His skin had turned soft in places, and shimmered with colors that were not human. His thoughts were no longer only his. He could feel her memories blending with his, her emotions melting into the fabric of his mind. He tried to hold on to something, a memory, a face, a name, anything that could remind him of who he was before this began. He saw flashes of Earth sunlight through the trees, the engine hum of the ship, the reflection of his own face in a mirror, and then callous thoughts swept over those images, softening them, dimming them, making them feel like dreams. Instead of memories inside the shared mind, Kayla's voice continued to sing with warmth and calm. She showed him visions of her people merging together across time and space, becoming more than they were through sacred union. She showed him how they lived forever, not as individuals but as shared minds within one body. How love for them meant losing the need to be separate, how loneliness did not exist, because once bonded, they were never alone again. But Eli's instincts pushed back. Survival still lived deep inside him. Something in his bones remembered what it meant to fight when the self was threatened. He tried to speak, but there was no sound, no language in this place, only emotion. So he forced his thoughts into sharpness. He imagined cold metal. He imagined the silence of space. He imagined the pain of separation, anything to break the pull. Kayla felt his resistance, and her light dimmed for a moment. Her form shivered gently. Her emotions wrapped him in sadness and confusion. Not anger. She did not understand why he was afraid. She believed he was ready. Her thoughts reached for him again, promising peace, safety, eternity. But Eli knew now this was not a place where he could stay, not without losing himself completely. Warmth that had once felt like affection, now felt like pressure. His skin tingled with a sensation that was too much to bear. And his chest grew tight, as if something was crawling inside his. Heartbeat slowed, then quickened, then lost its rhythm, and through the haze, he realized his body was trying to reject the bond, but it was already too deep. Kayla's presence was inside him, not just around him. In desperation, he reached into the connection and sent a thought, sharp and clear, not words but meaning. Let me go. Kayla's response was silence first, then sorrow. She did not reply in thought, but in memory she shared the image of another time long ago when one of her kind had tried to bond with a creature, not ready. How that creature had fought until its body broke, how the bond failed, and both minds were lost. Eli felt panic rising. His breathing was shallow, and his arms were still frozen beneath the merging energy. He reached for another strategy, something beyond struggle. He began to mimic agreement, sending emotions of calm, sending thoughts of acceptance, pretending to giving. Kayla responded gently, pulling back the intensity of her bond. Her light softened the pressure in his chest, eased slightly. His limbs became looser, though still wrapped in the glowing threads. He kept the illusion going, letting her believe he was surrendering, but deep inside he was preparing. He focused every remaining part of his mind on the emergency beacon, implanted in his neural link. A last line of defense, used only in moments of absolute danger. It required mental clarity and a direct thought, a shape of urgency. Shaped the signal slowly, carefully hiding it behind the feelings he was feeding her. And when the pulse fired from his body, a silent call through the air, Kayla did not notice. Somewhere above in orbit, a signal reached the human cruiser, and alarms lit the command deck. Within moments, a response team was launched, not with weapons of war, but with tools of rescue and defense. A small team dropped into the atmosphere, moving fast toward the coordinates marked by the beacon inside the chamber. Eli felt his strength fading. His pretending was no longer easy. His body was slowing, not by choice, but by the slow merging of his cells with hers. His vision dimmed, and he saw parts of himself no longer solid. His legs were wrapped completely. His waist was half gone into her glowing form, and still Kayla held him with tenderness, not rage. Then the chamber cracked with sudden sound. The air split with a flash of blue and white. The walls trembled, and for the first time, Kayla turned away. Her light flickered. Her form pulled back, not in fear, but in confusion and pain. Human rescue squad burst through the chamber. Barrier armed with neural disruptors and sensory scramblers. Their leader shouted commands, but the words were distant. Eli could barely process the sound. He only saw Kayla turning toward them, her form glowing brighter in defense. They did not fire to harm. They fired to break the connection. Blasts of focused energy struck the bond between Eli and Kayla, causing a shockwave through the chamber. Eli screamed without voice as the link tore through his body, and Kayla cried out, not in pain but heartbreak. Glow around him collapsed. His skin returned slowly to its solid form, and the shimmering threads fell away. Kayla's Light dimmed and her body pulled back, drifting to the side. Her eyes met his one last time, full of sorrow and love. The team pulled Eli out fast, placing him in a containment pod. His vision was darkening, his body numb, but his mind still touched by her thoughts. Just before the chamber vanished behind the rescue team, he heard her say, not with voice, but with pure feeling, "You were almost mine." The wind outside the chamber howled across the sky of Valterix as the rescue ship broke through the dense air, filled with shimmering particles left behind by the disrupted bond. Eli lay inside the containment pod, unable to speak, unable to move. Only the soft pulse of light from his skin remained glowing faintly where Kayla's energy had touched him. The medics worked around him in silence, hands moving fast, scanning his vital signs, checking the strange symbols that had appeared across his chest like ancient language etched in living light. Inside the medical bay of the ship, the air felt colder than it should. The walls were sterile and human, once again a sharp contrast to the living warmth of the chamber below. Eli opened his eyes slowly, vision blurred by the memory of what had just happened. He could still feel her presence in pieces, not as a voice, but as echoes of emotions left inside him. Each breath he took brought a memory of her thoughts, her longing, her belief that what they were doing was love. The ship commander stood at his side, a woman known for precision and silence, her expression unreadable. She nodded to the medic team, then leaned closer and told Ela that he was safe now, that he had been pulled from the merging in time, and that the neural disruptor had worked just before full integration could complete. But Eli was not listening to her words. He was listening to the silence in his mind where Kayla used to be. His fingers switched slightly. He lifted one hand and stared at it. It still looked human, but under the skin something shimmered like light trapped beneath. The surface parts of him were still marked, still connected. The medics told him the merging had gone deeper than expected, that some of Kayla's energy had fused with his cellular structure, and now lived inside him. Not dangerous, but not human either. They warned him there might be after effects, emotional or physical, maybe both. They told him to rest, to recover, to forget. But how could he forget something that had reached into the soul and tried to stay forever? Days passed slowly. Eli remained under observation, watched by doctors and scientists, none of whom could understand the depth of what had happened. He answered their questions in simple words, keeping the deeper truths to himself, because none of them had felt what he felt. None of them had seen her eyes when the bond broke. None of them heard her silent goodbye. Echoing through the chambers of his mind, he learned that Kayla had survived, but had been moved to a containment zone deep beneath the surface. She was not harmed, only separated, kept in isolation, because no one knew what she might do. No one understood if she was a danger, or just misunderstood. Eli asked to see her, but the request was denied. He was told it was too soon. He needed to recover. He needed to stay away from the bond that had almost taken him. He said nothing, but inside, he knew he had to see her, not for closure, but because a part of him still belonged to her, and maybe always would. Late one evening he found himself alone in the medical room. The lights dimmed, the hum of the ship low and steady. His mind wandered back to the first moment he saw Kayla, her soft gaze, her silence, her strange beauty. He remembered the warning of his teammate, the words that had sounded like fear, but now felt like truth wrapped in concern. He stood slowly, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself. Truly looked, and what he saw was not just a man. He saw something changed. His eyes were deeper, his skin glowed faintly at the edges, and his thoughts carried colors they never had before. He placed a hand on his chest, where the shimmer was strongest, and closed his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, he felt her, not speaking, not reaching, just existing, a quiet presence curled in the corners of his soul like a memory that never left. And in that moment, he knew he could never return to what he was before. This he made a decision, not out of romance, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. He requested one final communication with Kayla, not through touch, not through merging, but through the ancient way the Turians once used, a focused mind link held in a safe chamber built to allow thought without risk. They brought her to the chamber under heavy watch, her form dimmer than before, her light flickering like a candle in wind, but her presence, still powerful, still full of depth. She stood across from him, no words, no movement, and then the connection opened. Their minds met in silence. Not with joy, not with pain, but with truth. She showed him what she felt in the moment of merging, her hope, her love, her belief that he had accepted her fully. He showed her his confusion, his fear, his struggle to survive, and then his sorrow. She understood finally that humans did not see love as she did that for her species. Love meant dissolving self into the other, while for humans love meant keeping identity and choosing togetherness through it. Kayla did not cry, but her light dimmed in quiet acceptance. Their link remained open for minutes or maybe hours. Time lost meaning in that space, and when it ended, they both stepped back, not closer, not further, but apart with understanding. Eli turned to leave the chamber for the last time, the light behind him fading slowly. As per their Kayla was taken back into isolation, but in his chest, the shimmer still glowed faintly, a reminder of what he had survived, of what he had almost become. The escape had not saved only his body, it had saved his sense of self, yet left behind a part of him that could never be recovered and never be replaced. The stars outside the viewing deck sparkled in silence as Eli stood alone, watching them stretch across the endless dark sky. The ship hummed beneath his feet, steady and calm, yet inside his heart, nothing felt still. His body had recovered as much as the doctors could manage. The tests showed stability, the scans showed life, but none of their machines could read the truth that remained deep within him. He was not the same Eli who had arrived on Velterix, curious and bold, with eyes wide open to discovery. He had walked into an ancient kind of love, one that he had misunderstood, one that had offered him eternity, not through time but through the loss of self. And now that offer still echoed inside him, like a distant song he could not forget. The shimmer on his skin remained faint, now hidden beneath layers of cloth and quiet, but every time he touched it, he felt a warmth that did not belong to Earth or to any human world. It was Kayla's presence, not alive, not active, but sleeping like the last breath of a dream that had not wanted to end. He was cleared for return to Earth. His orders were simple. He would be debriefed, he would give testimony, he would be asked questions he might not want to answer, but none of that mattered to him. Now what mattered was what still waited beneath the planet's surface, what remained behind the quiet walls of containment, a presence that had once tried to love him in the only way it knew how. On his last day, Ele made one final request: not to see her, not to speak again, but to send a message, one thought wrapped in clarity, one truth spoken in the way the Tarians understood, with feeling, not with words. And when the approval came, he stood inside a meditation chamber, alone with a translator who opened the link just long enough to carry his message across the space between them. He closed his eyes and let the thought flow, not forced, not shaped by fear, but honest and steady. He sent her the image of the stars, the feeling of breath, the shape of solitude, and then wrapped within it the gentle truth that he could not be hers, and she could not be his, not because they did not care, not because they had failed, but because they were built to love differently, and some differences could not be crossed without breaking something sacred. He included the feeling of gratitude, not for the pain, not for the fear, but for the understanding she had shown in the end, and the part of her that still lived in him like a soft light held behind the ribs. When the message ended, the translator closed the connection and said nothing. They did not need to speak. The chamber held a silence that did not ask to be filled. Eli walked away from Velterix with steady steps, his body stronger, now his mind clearer than it had been in days. But in the quiet hours when the stars moved across the ship's window, he still thought of Kayla, of her soft light and deep voice, without sound, of the chamber that had breathed with emotion, and the moment she whispered that love meant becoming one. Earth welcomed him back with questions, with applause, with unease. Some saw him as brave, others called him foolish. The official reports said he had made first direct, intimate contact with a non-human life form and survived, but none of them truly understood what survival meant. In this story, it was not about escaping danger. It was about returning with a piece of someone else inside you, a piece that would never be removed. Time moved on the mission was recorded in human archives, and researchers studied the scans for years. Fascinated by the biological changes in his body, the energy that still pulsed softly beneath his skin, but none of them saw the full picture because none of them had stood at the edge of self and felt another being reach in with love and say, "Let us become something new." Ale never returned to Velterix, though. Many times he stood at the edge of travel looking toward the stars, wondering if she still waited in silence or if she had already returned to the flow of her people, blending again into the sea of shared thought where identity dissolved and unity lived. He never formed another bond, not because he could not, but because no connection ever felt as real as the one he had almost surrendered to. He spent his years teaching new explorers, sharing what he could without sharing too much, always careful to warn them that not every form of love is gentle, not every invitation is safe, and not every story ends with both hearts still whole. He wrote only one account of what had happened, a personal letter. Never published, never sent, stored inside a locked file, buried in a personal device. The letter was not long and held only this: "You asked me once if I was ready to become one. I thought I was. I thought love meant closeness, but I learned it meant something more to you, something deeper, something beautiful and terrifying. I carry you still, not because I chose to, but because you gave me something I did not know I could hold. A part of you lives in me, and I have no wish to let it go somewhere in the universe. A world still sings with light and memory, a world where two beings stood on the edge of forever and chose not to cross, but still remember the path. The stars continue their silent watch, and Eli continues his journey, not as a man who won, not as a man who lost, but as a man who came close to becoming something else and walked away forever changed. The end.